The slogan, "Venezuelans prepared to fight US invasion," is no longer simply a rallying cry used at political marches. It has become a defining message in one of the most dangerous geopolitical confrontations now unfolding in the vast Americas. In Caracas, President Nicolás Maduro, who remains the internationally recognized head of state of Venezuela and continues to consolidate authority across all branches of government, stands at the center of a crisis that now involves the full force and strategic attention of the United States under President Donald Trump, who began his second non-consecutive term on the 20th of January 2025. The standoff between these two leaders has escalated far beyond rhetoric and now sits at the edge of military confrontation. In recent weeks, crowds have surged into Caracas's Plaza Bolivar, filling avenues with red banners, drums and chants as Maduro appears on stage, holding the country's constitution, presenting himself as the guarantor of national sovereignty against what he calls an imperial threat. The atmosphere feels electric but tense. The public has grown used to political spectacle, yet something about the present moment feels closer to rupture. This is not just routine mobilization. Offshore, the United States has deployed an aircraft carrier strike group, including the USS Gerald R. Ford, along with a Marine Expeditionary Unit positioned for possible amphibious operations. Washington has closed US-controlled airspace around routes to Venezuela, imposed new sanctions on key Venezuelan entities, and openly discussed military options in high-level briefings. Trump's national security team now argues that Maduro represents both a political and security threat, citing narcotics designations, human rights abuses, and the collapse of democratic institutions as justification for escalating pressure. Maduro's response has been unambiguous, delivered in speeches that Venezuelan state media replay on loop. Standing before cameras in Caracas, he warned that if Venezuela was attacked, we would declare an armed struggle and a republic in arms. On another occasion, he reinforced that message, stating that if Venezuela were attacked, we would immediately move to armed struggle in defense of our territory. These remarks have become the backbone of the government's national messaging, treated not as political poetry, but as literal strategic planning. Maduro insists he will not be toppled by sanctions, covert operations, or military pressure, painting the United States as seeking a pretext to strike and describing the US posture as a step-by-step tightening intended to provoke a reaction that Washington could then label aggression. Behind these dramatic speeches lies a doctrine shaped by years of deterioration in Venezuela's conventional military capabilities. Analysts widely agree that the country cannot match US forces in traditional warfare. Much of Venezuela's air force is believed to be partially grounded due to lack of maintenance and spare parts. Only a portion of its combat aircraft remain operational. With a handful of F-16 fighters still able to fly, the Navy has suffered similar decline. But Maduro and his commanders are not planning to fight the US in open skies or blue waters. Their strategy assumes that any US invasion, even if initially successful, would trigger a long-term guerrilla conflict that Washington cannot sustain politically. This doctrine centers on the concept of a people's war, a nationwide network of militias, reservists, paramilitary units, and loyal civilians embedded into the geography of the country. According to official figures, Maduro claims to have mobilized millions across combined military and militia structures and has announced goals to expand the civic military reserve further. While independent analysts doubt these numbers reflect fully trained combatants, the mobilization itself is real. Schools, factories, public squares and remote towns have hosted drills aired by state television showing civilians learning weapons handling, search procedures, first aid and urban defense tactics. Maps displayed on Venezuelan television show hundreds of potential guerrilla staging points, from dense barrios to remote interior regions with oil pipelines, electrical substations and strategic bridges. The intention is clear. US forces might seize key cities, but they would inherit thousands of square kilometers of contested terrain ideal for ambushes and prolonged resistance. To give this architecture legal and administrative structure, Maduro has enacted a decree granting him sweeping national security powers in the event of a foreign attack. It allows nationwide mobilization of the armed forces, transfers authority over essential industries such as electricity, oil and telecommunications directly to military command, and authorizes the creation of local defense councils. Maduro characterizes the measure as defensive but offers a pointed explanation for its necessity, accusing Washington of manufacturing tensions. In a televised appearance, he insisted that what they were looking for was a military incident and added that we have not fallen for provocations, nor will we fall for them. The United States dismisses these claims, presenting its actions as a mix of law enforcement, democracy, promotion, and regional stability. Trump's officials say Maduro presides over a criminalized dictatorship and that pressure, diplomatic, economic, and, if required, military, is essential to prevent Venezuela becoming a hub for illicit networks. Within Washington, however, opinions differ on whether an invasion is truly on the table or whether the build-up is primarily coercive signaling aimed at splintering Maduro's inner circle. Regionally, the crisis is viewed with alarm. Governments across South America and the Caribbean already host millions of Venezuelan migrants who fled economic collapse, and they fear that even a brief war could unleash another, larger wave of displacement. Border countries worry about humanitarian strain and the risk of being drawn unintentionally into military escalation if US forces require staging areas or overflight permissions. Diplomatically, they try to balance condemnation of Venezuela's democratic backsliding with resistance to any role in a military solution. Inside Venezuela, the idea of resisting a US invasion resonates in complicated ways. The country remains deeply polarized. Many blame Maduro for economic collapse, corruption, and repression. Others see him as defending national sovereignty against a history of US intervention in Latin America. Yet even among government critics, there is unease about US troops entering Venezuelan cities. Memories of Guatemala, the Bay of Pigs, Panama and Iraq fuel skepticism that foreign intervention would bring order rather than chaos. This tension plays out in everyday conversations. Women in bakery queues ask if they should stockpile rice. Workers wonder whether sons will be pressured into neighborhood militias. Students debate how long power, water and internet could survive bombardment. Older Venezuelans recall past unrest and say they do not want to relive violence. Many fear that war would turn existing shortages into outright catastrophe. Maduro's supporters try to turn anxiety into displays of unity. Rallies show pensioners disassembling rifles, neighborhood watch groups rehearsing evacuations and first aid, and commanders promising that every apartment block and hilltop will become a defensive front. State television mixes patriotic documentaries about historic battles with images of today's militias, reinforcing the idea that resistance to a US invasion would be both historic duty and present reality. Trump's administration uses the confrontation to signal resolve. The deployment of carrier strike groups, amphibious assault vessels, reconnaissance aircraft and special operations elements, combined with tightened sanctions, serves as both threat and leverage. Trump must balance this posture with the risk that a drawn-out conflict could become, in Maduro's words, the political end of his presidency, a warning crafted to evoke the spectre of quagmires like Vietnam. While it is unclear how much this affects Trump's calculus, his advisers still repeat that all options remain on the table. Analysts stress that the current US posture can simultaneously support coercive diplomacy and prepare for potential intervention. What keeps intelligence services uneasy is the possibility of miscalculation, a clash at sea, a misread radar lock, an accidental shoot-down that abruptly turns brinkmanship into war. Caracas appears to be preparing for that worst case, tightening security around borders and military sites, rationing fuel for defense purposes and reinforcing backup command facilities. For ordinary Venezuelans, these geopolitical moves intersect with daily hardship: inflation, hospital shortages, power cuts, and families scattered by migration. Preparing to fight can mean joining militias, backing the government, quietly planning how to survive, or simply hoping that neither leader decides to test the other's resolve. For now, both governments insist they do not want war while taking steps that make it more likely. Maduro's repeated declarations that Venezuela will meet invasion with armed struggle and a republic in arms, his claim that what they were looking for was a military incident, and his vow that we have not fallen for provocations, nor will we fall for them, define the narrative inside Venezuela. Trump's mix of sanctions, deployments and refusal to rule out ground forces defines the American one. Between these positions lies a volatile landscape of fear, pride and political calculation. Venezuelans sense that the decisions of two presidents, one in Caracas, one in Washington, may decide whether their country becomes the next theatre of armed conflict in the Western Hemisphere. In that uncertainty, people brace themselves however they can, by joining militias, attending rallies, praying, stocking food, or simply hoping the Brink never becomes the drop.